communities that we're going to depend on. Got it. And the rural communities that we depend on for conservation, and our partners and supporters, that safety's been central to the decisions we've been making, as it always has been, but certainly in a novel way. So given the unprecedented challenges of running a field-based organization in the face of the COVID crisis, we've been adjusting and focusing our decision-making based on, first of all, maintaining our staff of currently 9 full-time employees, plus our seasonals, meeting the KBO priorities and objectives, and continuing to innovate to best meet our mission of advancing bird and habitat conservation through science, education, and partnerships. And while the pandemic rages on, KBO has remained strong through the dedication of our staff, our board, the partners, and our donors, old and new. And I want to thank you all. Richard said that you all would make a an honorarium donation to the Klamath Bird Observatory, and every little bit counts. So thank you right from the start. When the gods, the stardust of the Great Bang, the evolution, whatever the powers may have been, placed the fate of our existence in our own self-conscious hands, and in doing so, the fate and well-being of our earth into our hands as well, we have looked up at and looked up to birds. And this visualization is our view. This quantifies human observations of barn swallows from throughout the year and from across the Western Hemisphere. This is using eBird data provided by the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology. And I can't look at this image without feeling a sense of awe for the miracle of migration, the continental migration of this beautiful fork-tailed swallow that weighs less than 20 grams. And this is just one example showing how many of our birds, including some of the smallest and most beautiful gems, take flight on miraculous migrations, weaving together our continents and both the natural and human systems that make up our global quilt of life. Birds permeate all aspects of life on Earth. We've always recognized their the inherent value of birds, idolizing and even worshiping them. Birds are the messengers of our gods, the heavenly deities, with wings that are our skies, and their eyes are our sun and moon. Images of birds dawn all that is important to us. They are our religious icons. They appear as central characters throughout our literature, music, and art. They decorate our currencies, our government buildings, and our places of worships, as well as our home. And they light the skies with sense and color, and they hold away despair, something today that we all need. Looking up the birds, we recognize that their fate is in our hands. And more importantly, we also recognize that our fate is inseparably tied to theirs. Birds provide unmeasurable benefits to society. They pollinate, they disperse plant seeds, they control insect pests, they contribute to our economies in enormous ways. Consumer spending in our pursuit of appreciating birds generates over $20 billion in economic activity annually. Plus, in appreciating birds, we connect ourselves with the outside world, which is being recognized as an incredibly important way to maintain our mental health. The canary in the coal mine is a simple concept that represents our deep understanding that birds are truly the bellwethers of our own existence and well-being. When the canary in the miner's cage falls ill, the miner knows to retreat. The atmosphere in their mine shaft cannot sustain life. And as such, birds are excellent indicators of the environmental health of and the ecosystem integrity that we all depend on. And our ability to monitor many species over vast spatial scale far exceeds that of any other animal group. And thus we know that without birds, our children are sure to perish. So the bird conservation community is working to elevate our message to the public and the media to open the door to the idea that birds and bird habitats are positively linked to the things that are important to society. The door to this idea that bird conservation benefits people in very broad ways. For example, we're working to help society recognize that bird habitats support clean water, something that is basic and fundamental to life on Earth and human well-being. And birds, as I mentioned before, in their habitats support good health. With a growing acknowledgement to the toll that mental health issues are taking on our society, there are amazing studies out there that demonstrate the benefits of not only being in nature, but specifically the benefits of watching and listening to birds. However, by seeing and hearing birds, we are seeing and hearing the urgent and alarming message that they are telling us. In 2019, an article published in the journal Science documented that since 1970, we've lost nearly 1 out of every 4 birds in the United States and Canada. And the study notes that as indicators of the environmental health of our world, birds are signaling that the natural ecosystems across North America are now being so severely impacted by human activities that they are no longer supporting even our most common birds. We knew that our most at-risk birds were in decline. However, with this paper, there's a new statistic. Since 1970, we've lost nearly 3 billion birds. And this loss is no longer limited to birds in natural areas. This loss includes the birds in our own backyards. Bird population declines and loss are no longer restricted to rare and threatened species. The declines are pervasive among common and familiar species. Half of the total net loss is made up of 10 very common widespread species. For example, the dark-eyed junco and the red-winged blackbird are examples of familiar birds that we have lost hundreds of millions of individuals of. There are 168 million fewer dark-eyed juncos than there were in 1970. 168 million. An alarming fact is that some of the steepest declines and largest loss of individuals have occurred in several introduced species even, including the much maligned house sparrow and European starling. This is also telling us that if we can't even sustain house sparrows and European starlings and rock pigeon populations on the landscape, something is very wrong. While the paper reveals broad-scale losses that are signaling a widespread ecological crisis, the authors did emphasize that that's not the end of the story. There are many ways to help save birds. Birds are telling us that we must act now to ensure our planet can sustain wildlife and people, and the study demonstrates that it can be done. This new science paper documents promising rebounds resulting from galvanized human efforts, including the recovery of waterfowl over the past 50 years. The science-driven North American Waterfowl Management Plan is one of the world's most effective conservation models. It has guided the protection of a network of wetlands, many occurring on our wildlife refuge, that meet the needs of waterfowl throughout their full annual cycle and across the migratory ranges. This waterfowl conservation program also put regulations in place to ensure that we would not hunt our ducks to extinction as we did the passenger pigeon, but instead that our duck hunting would fund the long-term conservation of waterfowl species. Another example, the remarkable recovery of the bald eagle and other birds of prey. The science was clear. Widespread application of DDT was causing widespread declines of bald eagles and peregrine falcons. But the science was not enough. It was not until Rachel Carson in her groundbreaking book, Silent Spring, brought the attention to the public to this crisis and the environmental consequences of pesticides. And then we began to pass laws and invest in the efforts that were needed to recover these magnificent birds of prey. The big question moving forward is, how do we replicate these successes for other birds? Through science and awareness. So the bird conservation community is rethinking our approach, and we have developed 5 new game-changing paradigms to bring back 3 billion birds. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit. How are we scaling conservation from local to landscapes and using the avian knowledge network to support the new game-changing paradigms and support this conservation movement and this new awakening? The paradigms include 5 different aspects. Building an unprecedented coalition to address the bird crisis, something we're doing here today. Advancing the road to recovery, science, to identify the specific causes of bird population declines. Very complicated. Implementing new generations of conservation investment strategies or business conservation plans that serve as our roadmaps for population recovery and full life cycle conservation. Developing bold new legislative agendas that include new laws like the Recovering America's Wildlife Act that's in the Congress now with bipartisan support. And voicing a unified message about bringing back 3 billion birds. So tonight, I'll focus on the science that is fueling the new paradigm of our work to implement Partners in Flight and the Continental Bird Conservation Plan and our mission to not only keep common birds common, but to reverse the declines of our most at-risk species. And to start, I'll introduce you to the Klamath Bird Observatory and to the Avian Knowledge Network. Emphasizing high caliber science and the role of birds as indicators, Klamath Bird Observatory informs and improves sustainable natural resource management through our mission to advance bird and habitat conservation. We use a collaborative conservation planning approach that is based on a participatory research social science model that ensures co-production and multiple benefits conservation that's fueled by 1, long-term monitoring that provides information about changes in population, in-depth theoretical research that advances our understanding of the distribution and movements of birds, and applied ecology that addresses natural resource management challenges. The Klamath Bird Observatory applies our conservation science approach at local, regional, and international scales. Our ongoing programs inform conservation planning in the beautifully rugged and wildlife-rich Klamath-Siskiyou bioregion of Northern California and Southern Oregon. And we apply our science-based approach through Avian Knowledge Northwest. This is an interactive decision support system and node of the Avian Knowledge Network that provides applied science resources across the Northwest. Plus, KBO's professional education and international capacity building programs expand our influence hemispherically with partner-driven programs that protect birds throughout their breeding, migratory, and wintering range. And we recognize that conservation occurs across many fronts, and therefore we nurture an environmental ethic through outreach and education. Our science-based model is driven by data. And for nearly 30 years, we have been supporting the development of a collaborative monitoring networks that focus on collecting and sharing observational data through studies that are designed to address some of our most pressing natural resource management challenges with relevant and usable results. And this requires data management solutions for collating and making available not only our own data, but also data that are and importantly, that were collected by our partners. It has been estimated that the half-life of data is 7 years, a significant problem that represents a loss of investment, and that perpetuates the shifting baseline syndrome. So we created the Avian Knowledge Network to ensure no data are left behind. We also need a way to bring our science to the table, to carry our results beyond the scientific journals where they are published. Natural resource managers use science to inform the important decisions they make every day, and they expect the science they use to be published. However, they very rarely have the time and resources to keep up with the literature and seek the relevance of the results therein. So developing the Avian Knowledge Network, we've developed a data-rich decision support system to help deliver science in ways that our results will be readily used to improve the sustainability of ecosystem management efforts. The Avian Knowledge Network's vision, a world where bird populations thrive through conservation and management informed by a network of avian knowledge. To achieve this vision, the AKN supports a network of people, data, and technology to improve bird conservation management and research across organizational boundaries and spatial scale. Our AKN community is comprised of a variety of individuals ranging from community scientists to conservation biologists, computer programmers, non-government organizations, state and federal agencies, and private corporations and businesses. And our community ranges from people who want to take advantage of Avian Knowledge Network data management solutions, those who wish to contribute their data for the greater cause of bird conservation, researchers requesting data for large-scale analyses, and decision makers who want to use the best available bird science in their daily work. And through the contributions of this community, we operate as a sustainable collaboration based on a model that includes nonprofit organizational fundraising, government cooperative agreements, and contributions of data and information, all coalescing into a diversified, cost-share driven collaboration. The Avian Knowledge Network partnership with over 100 organizations involved is our greatest strength. The AKN is built to handle a variety of different protocols, methods used to count birds, area searches, checklists, point counts, call playback surveys, and even aerial surveys. And we continue to expand our data schema and protocol library and more, as well as more users into our system. For example, we just embarked on a project with the Atlantic Flyway where we brought in 100 years of colonial water bird nesting data from throughout the eastern seaboard. And we also manage discrete data sets for site conditions such as weather and vegetation data. And all this is built on a platform of common data schemas and metadata standards, which enable customized data entry interfaces and automated QA/QC processes. Thanks to the talented programming staff from our web technology providers, including the staff at Point Blue Conservation Science, formerly known as the Point Reyes Bird Observatory, Bird Studies Canada, Cornell, Bird Conservancies of the Rockies, and others, we are able to preserve data and metadata as technologies change or staff move from positions. And we're also dedicated to making data sets discoverable, ensuring the widest and most appropriate uses possible, while also developing customized applications for delivering relevant information that target our most pressing conservation challenges and decisions. Our tools automate data summaries and are also designed to help meet annual reporting and education and outreach efforts among our partner organizations. So I'm going to dive quickly into the architecture of the Avian Knowledge Network. We pay close attention to data security through a system of sharing levels, use agreements, and owners who control the access of their own data. For example, if you are a leader of a project, you get access to all the data in that progress regardless of the data sharing levels. And then you can identify the members of the public visiting the websites, other people, how do you want your data accessed? We're always pushing people towards as much open access as possible. So these are our data sharing controls. So here you see the data owner and their staff, and that top box represents the data management solutions. Ways to bulk upload data, do data entry, do QA/QC, summarize your data, understand your data. And then the data are pushed towards what we call warehouses, where you can homogenize different data sets and come up with analysis tools that help people have more ready access to their data. And for some agency folks and other people, this really helps things because it provides tools that allows them to summarize their data without necessarily having to do the programming themselves. And then, given the data sharing levels, we push those data out even further, different tools. And remind me at the end, I'm going to show you one of our newest tools, and we're going to do a live experiment looking at data from the San Fernando Valley area. But we for those that want their data more readily seen, then these tools allow for public access to the data. And this is all done through different data sharing levels. So some academics like to hold on to their data to make sure they publish them and then slowly make them more available. So you enter your data as raw, you clean them, and then you set your levels from restricted to completely open, sharing open, or really excitingly, a lot of data are in there where you can see them and visualize them, and then you can reach out to the data owners and ask for access to the data. Hopefully a bunch of you do eBird. This AKN node concept sometimes is confusing, but if you do eBird, some of you might use the California eBird node or portal. We have an eBird portal called eBird Northwest. I can go down to Columbia and enter eBird data in eBird Northwest, and it would go into the same place that it would go to if I entered it through the Columbia node. So what an AKN node is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Avian Knowledge Northwest, it's a doorway in to the Avian Knowledge Network, and it's a audience-specific decision support tool for conveying information that is in the Avian Knowledge Network to different audiences, whether they be regional audience, whether they be taxa-specific audience. There's eBird nodes for integrated waterbird monitoring, or for some of the shorebird, the Pacific-wide shorebird efforts. So the nodes are simply your entryways in, and they're ways for consuming data from outside of this core data system and decision support system that all of these different nodes have access to. So the Avian Knowledge Network is Northwest is the node we use in the Pacific Northwest. Unique to Avian Knowledge Northwest is eBird Northwest, our citizen science arm of this node, where we provide content and information about local projects and different kind of things, as well as sharing the information that comes out through the main Avian Knowledge Network node. We've got different interactive mapping tools here. We've got very specific science summaries to address land management issues. These are called decision support tools. So this is just one example of the Avian Knowledge Network nodes, and I'm going to show you some examples of how we've applied information about this. So the game-changing paradigms and the roadmaps to recovery. Rosenberg et al. Suggest that greater than 50% of Western forest birds are in decline, and Partners in Flight has drafted a tri-national conservation investment strategy for birds that breed in North America's Western forests to migrate and winter in the highlands of Western Mexico. And our Western Forest Plan outlines strategies to reduce the threats that these birds face throughout their annual cycle. This investment strategy serves as a tool for integrating conservation efforts, facilitate the stepping down of strategies to on-the-ground threat reduction actions, and then to roll up that information across conservation efforts to ensure cross-project learning and adaptive progress towards meeting the goal of stopping and reversing pervasive population declines, scaling up local issues to make sure that they are population relevant and meeting our goals. Our tri-national team who developed the plan ranked the most pressing threats, along with the human-driven contributing factors that affect bird populations and habitat targets. Ultimately, bird conservation is a human issue. It's a social science issue. So unsustainable grazing practices, unsustainable logging, issues with disrupting natural fire regimes and flooding regimes and other things are driven by things that humans do. And so our conservation strategies need to mitigate the things that the humans do in order to address the threats, in order to reverse the decline. And I'm going to talk a little bit throughout the talk about two of the highest ranked threats. And these are threats that our birds face throughout their annual cycles: unsustainable livestock farming and ranching, and the disruption of natural disturbance regimes. While climate is driving the proliferation of the fires that we're seeing today, it's the 100 years of fire suppression that's really put us in the situation where our forests are no longer resilient to the changes that are being faced by the climate dilemma. First, I want to take a big picture look at the kinds of things we can do with the Avian Knowledge Network. I want to take a large-scale look at one of our longest distance Western forest migrants. Relative to its body size, this mighty migrant is one of North America's let's keep that going, is one of North America's most long-distance traveler, the rufous hummingbird, a Partners in Flight watch list species that's been identified by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a bird of conservation concern. It's a Western forest conservation investment strategy target species. Excuse me, I'm going to go back. I got a couple more things to say about this. It breeds in the North American Pacific Northwest and migrates to its overwintering grounds in Western Mexico and parts of the southern US. So here I show an example of scaling up the coordination and sharing of data collection from the capture and banding of birds, along with other monitoring efforts to build on the pioneering work. This builds on 100 years of an integrated North American bird banding program, 3 decades of Partners in Flight efforts to standardize monitoring methods, the MAPS and MOSI demographic monitoring programs coordinated by the Institute of Bird Populations, eBird's revolutionary citizen science enterprise, and the Avian Knowledge Northwest advancement in informatics, science delivery, and decision support. While the rufous hummingbird's clockwise elliptical migration had been described, we used this big data set to further describe what turns out to be even a more dynamic migration pattern. Jose Rousseau, who works with us as a PhD student, recently graduated from Oregon State University and now working as a postdoc from Cornell. This is work from her dissertation. She used banding and observation data to estimate weekly age and sex specific abundances for migrating and breeding rufous hummingbirds across the Western United States. On the left, this map shows the Western United States, where dots represent the weekly mean location per age and sex category, with the ellipses representing the standard areas of those locations and lines connecting the mean migration routes. And the numbers represent calendar week. And then on the right, the map shows the proportion of young to adult hummingbirds captured at each monitoring station during fall migration. And the results show that the fall migration of young birds occurs further west and later than the adult males, with females migration occurring in between, both temporally and geographically. It's this kind of continentally scaled results that can only be made available through collaborative banding efforts and presents the kind of information needed to ensure each age and sex category of rufous hummingbird have the resources they need during their entire life cycle. So Rousseau, it further describes this amazing continental migration. And so we're using this information to provide resources to land managers. This is a document called the State of the Science and Conservation of Rufous Hummingbirds, to understand how the threats identified in the Western Forest Plan put at risk this species. So with a better understanding of the unique timing and geography of adult male, adult female, and young rufous hummingbirds, we're better able to understand how to address those threats that they face throughout their annual cycle. And the different age and sex classes are facing these threats at different times and at different places. So this document provides an example of how this kind of science is being used to generate, being used with data generated in the Avian Knowledge Network within the context of the Western Forest Bird Conservation Plan, part of the paradigms, and being able to apply to addressing conservation needs of this species. This State of the Science and Conservation document takes a specific look at the full life cycle conservation needs of rufous hummingbirds throughout the migration and considers the habitats, integrated food resources and pollination issues, land use threats, their dependence on fire, adapted ecosystems, and burned habitats, and climate. And given all of this, it's clear that we need to take actions that are informed by an understanding of the dynamics of full life cycle natural history of this species in order to reverse the population decline. So I'm going to zone in a little bit on the Klamath-Siskiyou bioregion where we look. Here's another example of stepping down the Western Forest Bird Conservation Investment Strategy. We worked with a group of conservation planners and practitioners, fire specialists, forest managers, and others representing public management agencies, NGOs, tribes, and private land stewards. And this group developed a strategic conservation action plan for the Klamath-Siskiyou Oak Network that integrates threat reduction actions from the investment strategy to address one of the West's most pressing conservation challenges, the loss and degradation of oak-related ecosystem types. The Quezon Plan covers an area characterized by global significantly biodiversity, And this map shows how the birds reflect the biodiversity. That dark red that outlines perfectly the Klamath-Siskiyou ecoregion is simply drawn by the diversity of at-risk species of western forest birds. Because the diversity of the Klamath-Siskiyou bioregion has been identified as an important climate refugia and therefore is an essential area for the conservation of oaks, both in California and Oregon, including the birds, because this region is the region highlighted in this map in the dark red has the highest number of at-risk species. And some of our climate research suggests that it is a refugia for both California and Oregon oak woodland species. Suites of partners in flight focal species, which are indicators, not necessarily the most at-risk birds, but suites of indicators are among the key ecological attributes that we're using to describe and measure current and desired conditions of oak habitats in the Klamath-Siskiyou area. And these focal species include both at-risk species and more common indicators. Partners in Flight regional habitat conservation plans outline habitat-based conservation objectives for these species. So the focal species and their habitat objectives represent the variety of conditions we need to recover and sustain diverse western bird populations and functioning oak ecosystems in this area. And this slide illustrates how select species align with the region's gradient of ecosystem types, from oak savannas that are open to closed mixed oak conifers, and in between, including the vast oak chaparral patches that occur in this area. So let's dig into some focal species science and see how KBO's informed oak woodland conservation efforts by measuring the effectiveness of our conservation acts. As I mentioned, our region is recognized as an important climate refugia. And here we used current and future focal species densities to predict to create climate prioritization maps for oak woodland species in the Pacific Northwest. And this map demonstrates the area's importance as a climate refugia for PIF, Partners in Flight, oak woodland focal species. Giant effort fueled by bringing data sets from throughout the Pacific Northwest together to do this kind of landscape analysis that we never thought we could have done when we started collecting data 30 years ago, given our ability to do machine learning giant data set analyses. So because of the heterogeneity of the forest type conditions in our region, conservation planning has been limited due to the inaccuracies and uncertainties associated with more traditionally used classified habitat maps, such as maps that you get from GAP. So how we're mapping habitats, which traditionally are used to understand where birds are, is wrought with problems. And so we've been working with Oregon State University to develop a species-centered habitat modeling approach, where instead of having a few botanists with a small data set tell us where habitats are, we're using hundreds of bird species to tell us where habitats are. This paper was one of our graduate students who's an employee, Kate Halstead. It won the best landscape ecology paper in 2020. We're super proud of Kate. So first, what we do is we take these gigantic data sets that we have and we link focal species occurrence data from large point count data sets to the raw spectral Landsat imagery to develop what we call species distribution models. And these are used to map the distributions of species-specific habitat types from the bird's eye view. Our bird's eye view modeling approach eliminates uncertainties associated with species distribution models derived using more traditional land cover data. With our species-centered models, we're less worried about the misclassification of habitats, as each bird's occurrence is defined by its own habitat. This allows our models to account for fine-scaled habitat features that are represented in the raw spectral data that are lost in the land cover data, features not occurring in those land cover derived models. And also our approach accounts for annual vegetation and vegetation composition and structure. So then we'll take those species, let's say oak woodland species, we'll take 48 species that we know occur primarily in oak habitats. And we stack the species distribution models of these oak woodland associated species to derive maps that represent habitats more broadly. These maps project species richness values for select species as a surrogate for oak woodland occurrence. And then to test the application of the species-centered habitat modeling approach, we used the stack distribution models and an independent point count data set to explore habitat fragmentation issues relating to species richness hypotheses. And our results demonstrate a negative fragmentation effect that contradicts some of the current literature on the subject. And we suggest that this contradiction results from two factors. Species richness generally is the number of species that occur. But we informed our measures of species richness by selecting only the species that are oak woodland associates versus using more naive species richness measures that include all birds. Plus, we believe that our species distribution models have greater statistical support than land cover derived. We don't believe, we've tested, they do, models used in the other studies. By further selecting species associated with each of the 4 ecosystem types covered in the Quezon Strategic Action Plan, we created even more specific maps. This is an example of oak chaparral species-centered map that's based on 5 chaparral focal species distributions. And so our oak restoration efforts that target threats posed by loss of naturally occurring wildfires often involve intensive fuel reduction that can pose additional risks to chaparral-associated species. So to address this, we used our oak chaparral habitat distribution models, additional site-specific bird monitoring data, and previous research to make recommendations about where to retain chaparral habitats with details about local patch size and patch placement given landscape level configurations of this feature. So we don't throw the baby out in the bathwater when we're trying to conserve oak woodland birds. So next, I want to share one last story that demonstrates how Partners in Flight focal species approach serves as a catalyst for improved ecosystem management while also helping to ensure the conservation needs of priority species are met. And this story involves a national monument and the complete rotation or two through the adaptive management feedback loop, the loop that is used for managers to experiment with management, us to monitor the effects of that management and provide information for them to improve their management actions for the benefit of birds. Now, I want to start by recognizing that the establishment of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument and subsequent changes in management was realized through significant advocacy work by other local and national environmental groups and through the development of the Bureau of Land Management's National Conservation Lands Program. The process happened to unfold as the Klamath Bird Observatory was becoming established and beginning to grow as a non-advocacy partner-driven science-based bird conservation organization that was able to feed data to that advocacy process for the creation of protected areas. In the late 1990s, as Partners in Flight was really taking off, KBO and others were documenting a high level of avian diversity in the Klamath-Siskiyou bioregion. Then in 2000, President Clinton issued a presidential proclamation establishing the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. And the executive order identified objects of biological interest and migratory bird diversity was one of them. And it also directed the BLM to study the effects of livestock grazing on the monument's objects and specified that grazing leases would be retired or could be retired if it was determined to be incompatible with protecting the monument's objects. And this circumstance resulted in the Klamath Bird Observatory taking a lead role on a comprehensive study of grazing involving partners including the BLM, Oregon State University, World Wildlife Fund, and many others. So using Partners in Flight multi-species approach, we looked at bird community composition across grazing gradients in the monuments. And our results showed a significant grazing effect with long distance migrants, foliage gleaners, and shrub nesters occurring more frequently in less grazed habitats. So the green circles represent this graph that I'm showing you is species space. It's using the currents of species to configure where points on the landscape get put in this two-dimensional framework. Points that are closer to each other have similar bird communities. Points that are further away from each other, you can't see the points, you can just see the dots, are locations that have dissimilar habitats. And so what you can see is we circle the points that are the high grazing points in red and the low grazing points in green, and then we can use the guilds of birds to understand how birds are configuring the landscape. So our results showed, as I mentioned, a significant grazing effect with long distance migrants, foliage gleaners, and shrub nesters occurring more frequently in less grazed habitat. At this time, Tom Fleschner had brought to light the negative effects of unsustainable grazing on public lands and on birds and other taxa. And our regional conservation plans had identified that reducing grazing in sensitive habitats like oak woodlands as an important conservation measure. So we were therefore able to suggest that reducing livestock grazing in the monument would indeed be in line with the proclamation's orders and PIF bird conservation objectives. 7 years as a result, cattle grazing was removed from the monument. And 7 years after livestock grazing was eliminated in the monument, we were able to return to our study sites to measure the effectiveness of this conservation measure in the monument's oak woodlands. And our results showed significant shifts in bird community composition in areas that had been heavily grazed pre-livestock removal, compared to little to no change in bird community composition sites that were where the grazing impacts had been lower. And this shift was driven by changes in the frequency of occurrence of long distance migrants and foliage gleaners. The guild previously shown to occur less frequently in heavily grazed habitats, demonstrating the benefits of livestock removal. So again, the left shows before grazing was removed and after grazing was removed, and the difference, the shift in that habitat where we didn't see a shift in the quasi-control, where the grazing impacts had been lower, showing the benefits of shifting the bird community as we anticipated when we removed that pressure. So in 2011, the State of the Birds report was put out and illustrated the importance of public lands for Western forest birds and raised questions about the protected status of our lands. And we wanted to see if our regional protected lands network was adequately protecting the region's most at-risk species, including the oak woodland and grassland birds. So this graph shows that 55% of the Western forest birds we're dealing with are on public lands, many of them on BLM and Forest Service. So again, we used a multifocal species approach along with density distribution modeling approaches that I described earlier in the climate vulnerability models to conduct a fine-scaled gap analysis of the Klamath-Siskiyou bioregion's protected areas, parks, refuges, monuments. Okay, and these are the grassland birds, oak woodland birds, and coniferous birds we looked at. And our results showed that there was indeed gaps in our network of protected areas based on the distribution of our focal species. The gaps were associated with oak woodlands and grassland species. These species had been identified as partners by Partners Flight and the North American Bird Conservation as at risk, and they were unrepresented or less represented in our protected areas. So we dug in deeper, and we found that the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument, recently protected, emerged as one of the region's protected areas that was best covering habitats for oak woodland and grassland species. So we zoomed in even further to identify areas around the monument where our most at-risk species occurred, the slender-billed white-breasted nuthatch and the Oregon vesper sparrow, and where they were predicted to occur. And we shared this information with the BLM and with advocacy groups that were showing an interest in expanding the national monument's boundaries. Our results informed President Obama's subsequent presidential proclamation to expand the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. The expansion included areas we had identified as important for nuthatches and the sparrows, nearly doubling the number of nuthatches and sparrows that now fall under the monument's conservation-focused management plan. And with this example of 15 to 20 years of work, I close to hopefully demonstrating further how our multi-species approach, driven by big data sets contributed to the Avian Knowledge Network, can be used to inform and improve adaptive ecosystem level conservation in our region's oak woodlands, but also to demonstrate how our focal species approach can be used to line up conservation actions that benefit our most at-risk species. Echoing what Ken Rosenberg, the author of the science paper, suggested earlier in some discussions we've been having, that there isn't a single species versus multi-species planning and management, that's a false dichotomy. We can do ecosystem level management and species specific management at the same time. My talk was filled with citations. It's fully cited. These are the many co-authors that were involved in the papers that we presented in this paper and in this presentation. And with that, I want to thank you for inviting me and listening, but I also wanted to show you one more quick thing. This is the Rapid Avian Information Locator. If you Google Avian Knowledge Network Rail tool, you can find this. So here I can come in and use all of the data that's available publicly in the Avian Knowledge Network and some sophisticated analysis tools to draw a circle around your all's area and get results. And what these results show us is a set of histograms that tell you what's the probability of occurrence and what's the likely abundance of the species that occur in your area 52 weeks a year, 52 weeks within the year over many years of data summaries. And then you can pick a species, let's just say the acorn woodpecker, and get the details, which gives you information about the status of the birds for the Fish and Wildlife Service perspective, their population estimates, how many of them are there, how important is your area for those population estimates, their range, some information about the birds with links to how to identify that bird, and then this really fun histogram map that shows you when you can find those birds. It appears that they occur regularly compared to, let's just take a look at the Allen's hummingbird, which shows, oh, regularly as well. Well, we want to find a migrant. Well, that's the tool. Go play with the tool. So the Avian Knowledge Network is available for you to play with. There's maps, there's different kinds of tools, climate tools, all sorts of fun stuff to look at. So I just wanted to let you know that you too can go in and be a part of the Avian Knowledge Network. And with that, I will close it up. And if we've got time for questions, happy to answer them.
Well, that's great, John. Can I ask you to, oh, you already went and unshared your screen. I appreciate that. And take one quick question from me. We were looking at your various oakland or oak territories, and you were identifying them by satellite spectra, I guess. Can you tell us what our area here would be classified as?
Point Blue Conservation Science houses the bird conservation plans for California, and they have some oak woodland bird conservation plans that will can give you information and distributions of the different oak ecosystem types. There are more Garryana oak, open oak habitats, not quite as diverse as these habitats. They're very at risk. Some of the threats are different. Oak recruitment is one. So that model that I showed you specific to the Northwest, but those other bigger distribution models that we did a project with Point Blue that has a California wide map of oak species that takes into account future oaks and gives you some of those climate style refugia for California available on the California Avian Data Center of the Avian Knowledge Network.
Yeah, well, thank you. I was looking at I guess it was the oak woodland population of birds. And I said, wow, that just really corresponds with the birds that we see in our backyard. And I never considered myself an oak woodland, but those are exactly the regulars that we see in our yard. So impressive.
Okay, so we have a question from Wanda Penner, and she asks that you speak about the role of marshes in improving the life of birds, John.
The role of marshes improving the life of birds. Well, these water systems are critically important. We were just actually on point because we're dealing with some pretty drastic marsh situations in the Klamath Basin National Wildlife Refuge, where especially in drought years, we don't have the water that we need to fill the marshes of the refuge. That refuge was developed by Theodore Roosevelt over 100 years ago. One of the first refuges set aside for migratory stopover habitat. So not breeding, not wintering, but migratory stopover habitat. We're seeing huge die-offs of waterfowl that are part of what they call sonic, Southern Oregon, Northern California migration pathways of the Pacific Flyway. Most of the birds wintering in the Sacramento Valley, when they head north to the Canadian border where they breed, they require those marshes in Lower Klamath and Tule Lake to be filled with water and available for them to stop over to fuel up for their migration. We're now starting to see some of these birds stay in the Sacramento Valley because they're sensing there's no water up there. We're seeing huge die-offs. So that's just an example where the entire Western population of many waterfowl species depend on that upper Klamath Basin to make their migration. One example of the importance of healthy marshes and wildlife refuges that get the water that they need. There's a lot of real controversy in the upper Klamath Basin about water. And the importance of the economic value of the farmers that are there. What are the economic consequences of losing Western waterfowl population? What are the economic consequences of the impacts on farmers, and how can we compensate to make sure we make the decisions and invest in the conservation and the economic importance for all involved, and try to limit harm to as many people involved as well. So the Klamath Basin, where our field station is, a classic example of the importance of marsh habitats for many, many different species, including migrating passerines, secretive marsh birds, as well as the waterfowl, and then the highest concentration of Western bald eagles that come and eat those waterfowl in the wintertime.
Okay, thank you. Have a comment from Jolene, who asks, how long can these projects take to accomplish? For example, how long did the Monument Conservation Program take to go into effect with BLM?
We started the Monument Project in the late 90s. The proclamation happened, where then we did the study from like 92 to 93. The management decision was made, so we went back and did the effectiveness monitoring 7 years later to demonstrate the benefits. Then the question of expansion happened. So that happened even a little later. And then the expansion of the monument happened in 2011. And so this was an example of a long-term investment, but there were several actions that happened during that time. So that's adaptive management and monitoring happen in long periods of time. Generally, if we're going to go do a study, we'd like to do 2 years in any given place to understand the differences in the diversity of birds over a period of time to take care of annual valuations. And often we can get management relevant results in 2 or 3 years. But then when you start to talk about managing the effects of management, some of our fire research suggests that 3 to 5 years after, which is most of the funding cycles, it tells you something. But if we stay in there for 10 to 20 years, we really start to understand the benefits of fire for some of our most at-risk species like olive-sided flycatcher. So it really depends on the question and the design, but it's a long-term commitment to collecting science in order to be able to not have that shifting baseline and understand how things change over time, so we can put into the context the management decisions made today within what was happening in the past. Not that we're trying to get back to the past, but we want to use the past to inform a more sustainable future.
Okay, thank you, John. Pat Bates has asked about the possible impact of sustained increase of urban and suburban wildlife friendly areas and strategies for evaluation.
Yeah, so we're working right now. Take a look if you're interested in a project called Big Year at Home, hashtag Big Year at Home. And one of the focuses is first of all, you mentioned your projects of being inclusive in the bird communities. We're really looking at urban refuges, urban bird treaty acts, other things like that, that could have an influence, especially in some of these areas like in California and the Willamette Valley, where our at-risk habitats, riparian habitats, oak woodland habitats that occur in low-lying areas where farming and or living in cities have permanently replaced those. So if we can learn how to create more bird-friendly urban situations through habitat restoration within those, but also through making your buildings glass friendly to reduce collisions and all sorts of things. I think there's a lot of promise in that. It's not going to be it's not going to do it, but it's certainly a piece to the puzzle. Now, in this 3 billion birds effort, and if you look up Bring Back Birds, I think it is, or the 3 billion birds crisis, you can find 7 simple actions that everybody can take part in. And that's going to be really important in these urban areas. Let's see if I can remember them. The number 1 is to put your cats indoors. There's no point in attracting birds to urban areas and urban habitats if there's outdoor cats there, because you're just attracting them to their death. And everybody I know that has a cat outside tells me their cats don't kill birds, but I know everybody's cats that are outside kill birds. The science is conclusive on that. Drink bird-friendly coffee, make your windows bird safe, plant native plants in your yards and reduce your grasses. Contribute your data to citizen science. You wouldn't believe how many people call us and say, hey, I'm a little concerned. I don't see nearly as many pine siskins as I used to. And I ask if you entered those data into eBird, because anecdotal observations are good, but data are better. Contribute your data and support conservation legislation and organizations that do the science. So yes, urban bird conservation is a part of it, especially with bringing the importance of birds and the benefits of birds for mental health issues as well. So critical.
Okay. Mark asks about Partners in Flight and other collaborative efforts that have been around for many decades, and yet we still have the result of 3 billion birds have been lost since 1970. What do you think are the main factors as why improvement in bird species survival has not improved given all these collaborations?
It's a really good question. And as we celebrated the 30th anniversary of Partners in Flight, that paper sure was a shocker. We're not keeping common birds common as we've been trying to do. I think there's several things, and it's the paradigms I mentioned first of all. With the migratory birds, we now do need to take a specific scientific approach to understanding where these birds are most limited on their wintering grounds during migration, so we can target conservation efforts in the right places. Sophisticated demographic monitoring like we collect using banding data. We need to scale up conservation, and that's this new generation of bird conservation plans, which help to identify threats and help us focus the most important conservation strategies across the range and then scale that kind of thing up. The other part of it is legislation. So a lot of our conservation has been fueled by game species and the hunting of species, which has been a fantastic model, and funding has come through that. Take a look at the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. There's a web page out there that talks about that. Write your representatives and tell them how important that is, because that's going to pour tons of money into state agencies for taking care of non-game species. So we need the funds to scale up conservation. Point Blue does great work in California. We see at the sites where we do restoration, the birds respond. We've done work in oak woodlands. We see the birds respond, but how do we scale that up to a population scale? The infrastructure packages that are coming through are going to have a ton of money to address the fire issue. It's a huge opportunity for us to do appropriate fire restoration and the appropriate use of ecocultural fire practices to restore the ecosystem functions of our habitats at a very large scale. And it's going to take the scaling up and the investment. We saw with the bald eagle, we saw with the peregrine falcon, we saw with waterfowl. If we choose to invest in conservation and bird conservation, it works. It's just about making the investment. And thus far, Partners in Flight has been kind of the redheaded stepchild of conservation. We're dealing with dicky birds. We're dealing with birds that have very little protections, and we're voluntary. We don't want to be regulatory, but if we have to be regulatory, maybe we have to be regulatory. It's about society deciding to invest in this, because we know when we invest in conservation, it works.
So one more question, that is, John, if we want to throw money at the conservation investment strategy for Western forest birds, what do we do?
Well, I'd be happy to talk to people about investing in those programs and look at your all's interest and determine where the best place to invest is and what your interests are. Our oak woodland conservation efforts are huge throughout the Pacific Northwest. We've got a coordinated project through Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture for oak woodlands. the work that Point Blue Conservation Science does. We're all dependent on private sector fundraising. So those are conversations I would welcome to have with folks. And you can direct your funding at the Klamath Bird Observatory with conversations, or contribute to different projects, or just contribute in general. So all of us, that kind of public support is huge, and we leverage that money to match it with federal dollars. So our limiting factor is how much private sector funding we can raise, because we can usually match that with federal dollars. So go to the Klamath Bird Observatory website, contact me directly. And happy to help direct funds. Of course, we'll take funds, but it's not just us. The other thing is that we have an international capacity building. I'm working with the University of Guadalajara and a new bird observatory that we helped to form called the San Pancho Bird Observatory north of in Nayarit, north of Puerto Vallarta. So we can focus attention down there on the wintering grounds, all sorts of opportunities of where to focus dollars.
And a related follow-up on that is, I see various arguments about what's most important. Is it breeding grounds? Is it wintering grounds? Is it stopovers? Is there any general thought about which of those are highest priority?
That's one of the big missing links in what you asked. What are we doing differently? So there's one of the paradigms is what's called the road to recovery. Pete Mara, who was with the Smithsonian, is now with Georgetown, and Ken Rosenberg, who was the lead author on that paper. We're embarking on a process where we're looking at our most at-risk species, and we're putting focus groups around those species. Those focus groups are identifying where those limiting factors are. We know for some species, but we don't know for a lot of these migratory species. So that's one of the things we're urgently working on through the road to recovery process and the science that goes around those species of birds. And so that's definitely something that we're trying to raise large dollars to make sure that we've got the science that we need so we can target the conservation in the right areas where these birds are most limited.
Okay.
I think that's one of the things that we didn't have before, and maybe why we've been less successful than we would have liked to have been.
I really want to thank you. I think our time is running long, and I'm also, I will talk with you afterwards about what contact information you would like posted with the recording of this program on our website. And we'll try to put up what you'd like to see in terms of receiving questions or directing support.
Fantastic. Yeah, let's talk about that. What I'll do is I'll give you my contact information and my assistant's contact information, because I am overwhelmed by email. So he's helping me do that. Yep. All right. That's great.
I really want to thank you again. And I know you are an extremely busy guy, and I appreciate you putting in what was obviously a big effort to put together something that gave a great overview of what you're doing there.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for your interest and the attendance. I think I see either an Allen's or a Rufous hummingbird there on Paula's screen. That's nice. Appreciate your all's attention and the great questions. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you again. Well,
good night, everybody.
Good night. I'm going to turn off recording, and Paula was going to lead us in the showing your favorite birds.
Yeah, it's take a minute if you want to put your camera on so we can see who you are, if you don't have to shoot right off, and just share with us one bird that you saw that you were surprised to see or happy to see. I know on our Franklin Canyon walk, I was really happy to see the white-breasted nuthatch, and that was exciting. And I saw some juncos recently. Anyway, I just wanted to have people share. I mean, let's have, Jolene shared with me today in a photo. That was shocking, gorgeous photo. Jolene,
I was so excited. I normally wouldn't want to bother you and text you something like that, but I had to share it with someone. So there's a palm tree in my neighborhood, and I pass by it when I walk my dogs, and I've been seeing owl pellets at the base of the tree, and I always stop, and I'm fascinated by the owl pellets, and I pick them up and look at them. My husband thinks I'm crazy. I'm like, you have no idea how cool this is. So I always look up to see if the owl's there, and it's never there. And this morning I looked up and he was looking down at me, and it was a barn owl, and his white heart-shaped face was I got a pretty decent photo for using my iPhone, and my
Beautiful.
husband was with me, and I was like, look, the owl's up there. And he couldn't believe it either. It's just such a rare thing to see an owl in the valley. So I was super excited.
Yay.
Jolene, where do you live?
Woodland Hills.
Wow, a barn owl is great. I mean,
Yeah.
great horned owls, screech owls, yeah, but barn owls are kind of an open space species.
I
That's
was
great.
surprised because I know they're not really common here, or at least like in the city, I don't think.
Yeah.
So it was, and I sent the photo to another one of my bird friends just to confirm that I was identifying correctly. And he's kind of like a much better birder than I am. And he said, yeah, that's a barn owl.
Yay.
Yeah, they're pretty unmistakable.
Beautiful.
Well, we had our first of season yellow rump warbler
Oh,
a couple of days ago. So they're back for the winter.
yay.
Our resident yard warblers are back for the winter.
Sorry,
Yay.
where is this?
Sherman Oaks.
Sherman Oaks, okay.
I've been hearing a warbler and I can't locate this little fella. I'm really aggravated.
Are you sure it's a warbler?
Yeah, well, now,
Because I will tell you, Paula, I have been hearing a lot of calls, and they're interesting calls, and they're unusual, and they're flamboyant and loud. And I realize they're probably titmouse.
no, I've seen and I know that we have.
I know they
This is
have
something different.
lots
No,
of
this was a
different.
warbler. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Someone else. Who else?
Yes,
wants to
yes,
share?
yes. We have the warbler in our neighborhood too. We just have to sit out in the yard and they come down and land on the flax plants.
What kind? What?
It's yellow. I haven't looked it up. It's got a black head and a black top, a black crown.
Oh, the
Okay.
Wilsons?
I haven't looked it up in the book, but
Nice. Okay. Where
but-
do you live? I'm
but-
coming over.
it's just fun because we have a lot of natural plants in the yard. In fact, it's a little overgrown right now, but it's a great place just to sit down in a chair and get real still, and they come right to us. We don't have to go find.
Well, I should mention that Kimball Garrett has been pushing for people to explore the smaller local parks for rare species. And I had the opportunity about a week ago to check out one of the parks near me. I live in Woodland Hills, but the park I was visiting was called the Calabasas Creek Park, which is right next to Sagebrush Cantina, for those of you who are familiar with that particular area. It's a very small park, maybe 2 acres. And the park is actually technically closed to the public until 2022, but I got to go inside the park for about a half an hour and saw 4 migratory species there, including warbling vireo, Townsend's warbler, black-throated gray, and orange-crowned warbler. So it was a very productive half an hour of time bird watching in this little park. So if anybody gets to go there, there might still be some more warblers there. So the migration season is still going. It's pretty, it's right at should be at its peak right about now. So
Yes.
I would urge people to check out some of these smaller parks, including Calabasas Creek Park.
How did you get in there? Because I pass by that place every weekend and it looks closed to me.
Well, I'm going to keep that little secret to myself, but you can.
Well,
You can.
the little park that I go to in Woodland Hills is Serenia. That's my favorite little local park. I don't know if you've been.
I've been there. I haven't been there for a while, but yes, I have been there. It's a big dog park, so I tend not to spend a lot of time there. But there are some trails that go up into the hills around there that can be very interesting also.
And we spend a lot of time putting on the buffet here at Encino. outside the breakfast window, and yeah, the nuthatches have been gone for a while, and suddenly, bang, they're back. They're taking advantage of the buffet. So that was pretty nice. And some of the warblers are coming
Yeah.
back in too. And
You saw the yellow warbler.
yeah, we saw the yellow warbler. So it's really nice to see them come back. I was kind of worried that they might be gone for good. So I call them the arrow bird because they come in, zoom, grab something, boom, out, so you got to look fast for those guys.
Wait, who is that? Who is it that's coming in? I missed
It's
that.
the white-breasted nuthatch.
Oh, I have to come over to your house.
Yeah, they like that seed tray thing, Paula.
Yeah.
Big flat seed tray, and they fly and grab it and go. They kind of startle everybody else off the tray because they're moving so fast. So speed demons.
Well, another good place to see nuthatches is at Sepulveda Basin, where they've had a very successful breeding season this year. So
yeah, I see them up and down the trees quite a bit. Yeah. Nice.
So I've still got 2 female hooded orioles hanging around.
Really?
Really?
Wow.
I yell out the door. Go.
Get away already.
WTF, are you just, what are you doing here?
What are they doing?
But anyhow, I'm still going through 2 quarts of hummingbird food a day.
Wow.
I have probably 20-25 hummingbirds around, 2 feeders. The highlight of the week, Dave Weesoff and I release occasional birds from International Bird Rescue. And the goose was not ready for discharge, but we decided we needed to walk. So we went for a walk, and we're standing in a place where people go illegal fishing at the wildlife lake all the time, and a sora swam by.
Wow.
So that is I'll move over here. There it is. That's a sora.
Real sort of thing. Yeah.
The first time I saw a sora, I fell in one of the canals over in Mar Vista trying to get a picture. It was really, really embarrassing. But it's not the first time or the last time I've been embarrassed.
Well, did you get the picture? If that's what counts.
It was a little murky.
Oh.
Okay.
So Pat, what's the name of all the gulls that are clustering right now in the basin? I forget.
That's a lot of frickin' gulls.
Yeah.
They're mostly Western gulls, and hundreds of them.
Yeah.
And
It's bizarre.
we have never seen this before. We do have white pelicans in now.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
they're in.
we've got a few white pelicans in. They've been here for a couple of weeks. But I don't know what is going on with the gulls. I have never seen this before. And, I've been, in there, like Chris,
Pat, could it be at all related to what's going on like in the Salton Sea area?
You know what, it could be. The Salton Sea situation is a big frickin' mess.
Right.
And it may be getting to the point where it's so toxic that they're moving. I don't know.
Well, this is a good point to bring up, politically for the basin and preservation, restoration of the basin too, because it's becoming a major refuge for a lot of birds that are losing their habitat somewhere else. Yep.
And I don't know what else to say. I will say, give me a pat on the back. Our whole lawn is torn out.
Yay.
Woo. We're putting in mostly golden currant, coyote bush.
Nice.
I'm gonna stick in a Palo Verde because I was in Arizona for a long time and I love it. And it's close. But everything else is gonna be native, and I'm really gonna be pushing this through the whole community, as well as pushing it through all the LADWP distribution stations, fire stations, so on. And thanks to Miriam, we had a meeting with the city council, wonderful environmental guy. And
Oh,
they're
Coretta's shop, it was Andy Schrader.
Andy Schrader, and they are so on board with this.
Wow.
So this is really an opportunity to really help.
So Pat, one thing I wanted to ask you, and as long as we have some people online, I think this is an appropriate moment. You were talking about a hearing that was happening on Monday where people needed to step up and talk about, you know, the impact on the redistricting and
Okay,
the impact.
I'll be glad to talk on that if you want to hear some creepy political stuff for a minute. There
Yeah,
was
but Pat,
what?
include who, a phone number, like if you're supposed to call in, if you want an action, like what that action is too.
Yeah, maybe we can generate a
I'll
email.
put it on, okay, I'm gonna put a website here. It'll be up not right now, but in the morning or later tonight.
Okay, throw it up and throw it at us and we can share it with the membership. Because we do need to kind of do a grassroots thing here.
This is the website I put up, Encino Neighborhood Council. We did do a community impact statement saying, apparently they've decided there's two basic plans. Either Encino in the basin are in a district from the West Valley over to Sherman Oaks, including the basin, or we're in a district starting with Encino, going to Los Feliz without the basin. And we're raising holy hell about that. The reason for the eastbound thing is to keep Nuri's district intact. And you do have to realize Nuri Martinez is the president of the city council. But that said, what happened at the hearing, the last weekend, I sat through 12 hours of hearings. I spoke twice. There was a 4-hour hearing Monday, 4-hour hearing Tuesday. The conclusion was they need another 4-hour one next Monday.
Okay.
I will have the link up to that.
Yeah, please.
Most likely first thing in the morning, because I've had about enough of this, today.
Okay.
But here's the deal. They realized they had made some assumptions right off the bat that probably people didn't want, and so on and so forth. Our Encino Neighborhood Council voted on a community impact statement saying we want to be in the West Valley and we want to keep the Sepulveda Basin because we are the most powerful advocates for it. And, and we are impacted. We're the ones that get an evacuation order when the frickin' thing catches on fire. So, and we're the ones that are concerned with the environment there. We're the ones that are going to be impacted by the Olympics and so on and so forth. There will be a third final redistricting hearing tomorrow, Monday night. It'll probably be 5 p.m. to 9 p.m.
God. That's so long. Oh my God.
Yeah, I know they're long. You don't need to tell me.
Yeah.
5 to 9 p.m. So take a look at our website for the Encino Neighborhood Council. I'll have it on in the morning. When I looked earlier today, they still didn't have it up yet. So I'll have it up. The first hour is public comment. And if you are adamant about keeping the basin in the same district as Encino, chime in. And the reason for that is we know what's happened there.
Yeah.
For years.
Yeah. Okay.
And both plans pretty much put Encino and Sherman Oaks together. The problem is the East plan starts with Encino, goes all the way to Los Feliz. And they're trying to call it an entertainment district. I'm going, entertainment?
What? Okay,
We're entertained?
no,
That sounds like you're talking about what they were calling the Ventura Corridor Plan. Is that the one?
No. I know what that is. No, this is the redistricting of city council districts.
No, that's what I mean. They call it the Ventura Corridor redistricting plan. There's
No.
two that they're favoring. I just looked at it, an
Yeah.
email about it earlier this
Yeah.
morning.
Okay,
There's-
yeah.
There's two
okay,
that they're favoring.
Yeah.
So neither one of them looks.
We want the West Valley one.
Uh-huh.
We
Okay.
want the one where Sherman Oaks is on the east, Woodland Hills is on the west. We're in the middle, and the basin is in our district. That will mean Bob Blumenfield is our city councilman.
okay, that's not a bad thing.
And I have to say, our City Hall gadfly, Mr. Puppet, did the most fabulous imitation of Bob Blumenfield last night I've ever heard. But you had to kind of be there.
Okay, so that one is D, right? The proposed plan D, if I recall.
That is either C or D is fine.
Yeah.
C
okay.
or D, I don't care which one. A is a disaster. B is really not okay. So, either C or D. Some of the people over in the West Hills, Woodland Hills were upset about that. And what you got to keep in mind is the chairperson of the redistricting committee was appointed by Nuri Martinez, who is the council president, who